Hey guys, it's Craig from Yard to Table Creations. Today we're going to talk about installing some drip irrigation. We are here in Southern California, so we like to use inline drip irrigation as often as possible because it is water wise. So first we're going to start out with a plan. We don't have to have any fancy drawings, but we do have to have an idea in our head of what we're going to do, where our plants are going to go, so that we know where we put our lines. We always put water first before you put plants, never plants before water. So if you look over here, you can see we've just drawn some basic lines in the soil, just showing us about where we're going to put our rows. It doesn't need to be perfect, but we do need to have a nice visual to see where we're going to put things. So as you can see up here, we've already got some irrigation run to these beds. This makes it really easy for us because we're just going to tap right into this. Luckily with drip irrigation, you don't need much water pressure, so you can run hundreds of feet of line. As long as you maintain about 20 or 25 pounds of pressure in that line, that wood drip system will work perfectly well. So next step in our plan is make sure we have all of our parts. We need to have our drip irrigation tubing laid out. We have it all laid out here in the sun so that it can kind of loosen up. When this stuff is cold, it doesn't really want to uncurl and it's kind of a pain to deal with. We have all of our connection parts lined out. We have our connector pieces, we have our T's, our couplers, whatever we need. Some shut-off valves. It's always nice to be able to shut off one section of your garden without having to shut off the rest. Our hose bib timer. If you don't have valves installed, this is a really quick, easy way to get irrigation to your garden without having to install PVC in the ground. So we're gonna hook this up to the hose bib. We have our pressure regulator and we have our swivel compression adapter. And this is what we're gonna connect our drip irrigation tube from the hose bib. Irrigation stakes. This is what's going to hold our hose down so that we're not creating trip hazards for ourselves in our garden, because we know we're going to be walking through harvesting our food. Once we have all of our parts laid out, we're going to be ready to start installing some irrigation. So first thing we want to do is try and get some of the curl out of this tube. One of the easiest ways to do this is to start laying this tube out this way and just unrolling it with your arms. It doesn't need to be perfect, but the straighter we can get this in the sun, the less frustrated we're going to be later, trust me. So now we're ready to start connecting this to our already existing irrigation system. So first thing, what makes the most sense here? We already have irrigation plugged in here, so we're gonna run a line here, and we're just gonna simply tee off into our rows from there. The simpler we keep this and the least number of connections that we have in our irrigation system, the more efficiently it's going to perform. So this line is an inline drip system. This means that there is an emitter, in this case every 12 inches, where water will just drip out at 1 gallon per hour. You saw we also had some black poly line. Black poly line has no drip emitters. This is simply for getting water from point A to point B. This is where we would plug in our 1/4-inch lines to micro sprayers or drip emitters that we want to run off of our line to different parts of our garden. In this case, we're going to be using this just to span distances where we're not needing water. All right, so first things first, we need to tap into this line. Simple enough, cut it open. Now in this case, we're going to use our T coupler. Simply insert your T into one end of your line, connect it back to the other end of your cut line, and now we have our outlet for our new water line. All right, so we're gonna start by installing some of our black poly tube. With this garden here, right now we're only gonna be irrigating this area, but there are plans down the road to have this whole area back here eventually be part of the garden. So we're gonna go ahead and install enough poly tube that this can just be plugged in at a later date. So we run our tube. I always like to leave a couple of extra feet at the end, just so we have a little room to play with in case we need to make any changes or if we want to add in something later on down the road. So we'll cut here. Now we need to make sure that we close this end off, and we're going to do that with a figure 8. So this is our figure 8. This is what we're going to use to close off the end. I prefer to use these over using the plugs that plug off the end, because this is easy to remove. When you put a barred plug in there, sometimes it's kind of hard to get out. You just have to cut your tube. So simply slide this on. We're going to fold the hose over and slide this right back up. Now this is ready to go. It's closed off, water won't get through there, but if we want to add something into this later, we just simply slide this off, open it back up, and connect our tubing. So now we're ready to run our inline drip lines. As we mentioned before, we have some lines to give us a guide as to where our plants are going to be planted. So we're going to run our hoses right along those lines, more or less. We're going to be using, again, our barbed T. This is going to go in. This piece here, this is going to go in where we cut. This piece here is going to be where our lines connect for our rows. We cut here, just like before. Slide these on. Slide this on. And we're ready for our line. We'll just go ahead and do the next 3, and then we'll run our drip lines. So now we're ready for our inline drip tubing. Just like before, we're simply going to connect and we're gonna run this the length of our garden bed. So now we have our drip lines run, we're ready to stake them down. They're easy to put in, they're easy to remove, but it also prevents us from having a trip hazard in our garden. Simply take your stake and wiggle it into the ground. Place your stake here, and we'll just give it a little wiggle, and that will hold our irrigation in place. So we're just gonna go ahead and install these stakes about every 3 feet. I'm gonna go ahead and put them all in here and get to work. All right, so we all know, anybody who's done any sort of plumbing, you know that multiple trips to the hardware store are almost inevitable. You're missing a piece, you're missing a part here or there. Most of the time there's a quick, easy solution to keep you from having to run out to the store right away to finish up your project. In this case, we don't have enough of the figure eights that we talked about earlier to close off the end. In the meantime, we're just gonna use a simple zip tie. Just like before, we're gonna fold this tube over. I'm gonna wrap our zip tie around here and pull it tight. Now at least we can test our irrigation system, and later on when we're out and about, we can stop by the store, pick up the rest of the parts we need and swap it out. This is not a permanent solution, but it'll get you by for a few days. All right, so we've got our irrigation all hooked up and ready to go. Last step now is just to test it. So we're gonna go ahead and turn it on, take a look and make sure we have water coming out of all the emitters where we want it, and no geysers showing up where we don't. All right, so we're just gonna go ahead and turn this on manually. We'll let it go ahead and start up, and then we're gonna go check our lines and make sure we don't have any problems. Okay, so we can hear, I hear air coming out, which is a good sign. And as these pipes fill up, we should start to see water starting to drip out of these drip emitters. Now, why do we use drip emitters? Drip emitters run on gallons per hour. In this case, these are dripping at 1 gallon per hour. When we use overhead irrigation, we're speaking in terms of gallons per minute. In Southern California, we all know our water bills are not cheap. So using inline drip is gonna be our most efficient way to water our garden without wasting a bunch of water. All right, here we can see that we have water dripping out of our drip emitters all the way down the line on all of our lines, and we don't have any unwanted geysers, so we're pretty good to go. Now remember, when you're installing your irrigation, always start with a plan. Plan first, plan well. That'll prevent a lot of things going wrong down the road, hopefully prevent multiple trips to the hardware store. Lay out your parts. Make sure you have your couplers, make sure you have your hose, put your hose in the sun. Doing all these things are gonna make your installation a lot less stressful. So we've laid out our parts, we got all of our stuff in the sun, we've got our irrigation hooked up, now all we need is plants. That's pretty much it. If anybody needs any help with any of this irrigation, you know where to find me.